Today I take a second look at using the plastic tool to show you an alternative way to set up your skeleton to animate this scene. Hello ladies and gents, and welcome to the second part of using the plastic tool. Last week I showed how you can animate a drawing using the plastic tool with an internal skeleton. But what about just using the plastic tool to deform other characters and shapes? Well, we can do this by not chaining the pivot points. And I'll do this today to animate this caterpillar walking along a log with the background also animated using the plastic tool. Let me show you how I did it. So for this example I'll draw a caterpillar, and I'll draw it using the Toonz Raster level for a very specific reason. And you'll notice that to colour him in, I checked that the draw order was set to under all to make sure that the green was coloured behind the black outline. And this is a really useful feature of the Toonz Raster level that makes it worth using, along with having indexed colours, so that once you've used one of the colours to colour in, you can then edit the colour in the palette and it edits on the drawing. Okay, so let's set up the plastic tool on this caterpillar, or worm, or whatever it is. So we'll create a mesh. Yeah, that's fine, I'll leave it with quite large triangles, because there won't be a lot of detail to add during the movement. So let's apply that. And let's build the skeleton. So you could build the skeleton internally, but it would make it difficult to move him. Let me just quickly show you. If you start at the head and add a few vertexes into there, and then change to animate, and you animate from the head, and we want the centre to come up and the tail to stay on the ground. And that's a trickier way of animating than having the root point outside of the main character. So let's just undo that. Okay, so the method we're going to use is to have the root point outside of the drawing, and from there we create vertexes inside of the character. Just select on the root point, then inside the character, back to the root, back inside, back to the root, and back inside. So then when we animate, we'll turn off keep distance, so we can click and drag any of these points and they don't affect the others. And that makes it easier to animate this character and other characters where one point doesn't affect another. So it's useful just to add flexibility to your drawings even when they're not actual characters, and you'll see this in the background later. But what I'll do for the caterpillar is I'll add two more vertices, one hanging off the tail and one going to the nose, which will give me more flexibility to keep the head and tail flat on the ground rather than pointing nose first to the ground. So same as previously, we'll just highlight and extend the drawing and the mesh. On frame 1 we'll start the animation and we'll add a global rest key, and then later in the animation let's make the caterpillar start to move. And there you notice me using the paint rigid tool to stop the face and tail from deforming too much as I set up the animation. And then let's bring him down again. Okay, let's see how that looks. So you can just keep adding keys to animate the character, but for this I want to create a walk cycle. So I want the final frame's drawing to look as much like the first frame as possible, so I can recycle the same animation. So then I'll just copy the same 40 frames, then using the animate tool I'll make the caterpillar walk from the left side of the screen over to the right. So there's two ways that you can do that. So the first is to add a separate level, and on this new level just draw around the character as neatly as you can. And then on frame 40, as you move to the right, I'll move this frame over and make sure it aligns exactly. And you can see there I've not quite aligned it up in the final animation. So, and you edit the animation nodes to make sure everything fits in the right space. The alternative way is to use shift and trace. A shift and trace is normally useful for drawing in between drawings, so you can see the previous drawing and to manipulate it to match the current. But it can be used in lots of other situations, like this for instance. So because there's only one drawing here, it'll always show the drawing from frame number 1. So let's just turn on shift and trace, and you can see immediately the grid appears here for the mesh on drawing number 1, and that's because we're on the mesh level. If you go to the drawing level it will show the drawing, but it is the mesh that we need to see. So you simply click edit shift, and then you can click and drag anywhere on the screen, and you can move the mesh from drawing number 1 to align it with the current mesh so you can see which parts need editing. So let's turn on the plastic tool there. We're in the animate mode. So now adjust the vertexes until the triangles line up. So let's get rid of this old column that we no longer need. And then we'll take these two columns of the drawing and of the mesh, and if you right click, you can then collapse them into a single sub-X sheet. Okay, so to make the caterpillar walk across the screen, all we need to do is copy these 40 frames of animation by highlighting them, then pressing Ctrl C, moving to the next blank frame and pasting with Ctrl V. And then if we set this stop marker to the end and take a look, you see the animation plays twice. So what we need to do is, using the animate tool, place the centre underneath the character. Doesn't really matter as we're not rotating him in this occasion. And then use position on frame 1 to set the position outside of the screen. Then on the final frame, we'll add a key to keep him in that same position. And then on frame 41, we'll turn on the onion skin and then move the caterpillar to sit on top of the final frame 40. Approximately there. So let's see how that looks. So 2 steps in and part of the caterpillar is on the screen. So all I need to do is continue this process by copying and pasting those 40 frames, then adding the keys to make the caterpillar walk from the left of the screen to the right of the screen. So I'll just do that now. Okay, so that's the walk cycle complete. So now all I want to do is to add a background, and I've already drawn one in here. And I've used the plastic tool on the background to show parts of it moving, like the bushes and the trees. To try and give the effect of wind blowing through the forest, blowing the bushes and trees, just to give the background some more life. So I collapsed the background into the sub-X sheet because it's made up of a few columns. If we just step into it by clicking on this button here. Okay, so if I hide all the columns first, so there's a plain colour background at the far back, then in front of that we've got some faded trees, in front of that we've got some trees that are clearer to see, then a single bush on the left, 2 bushes on the right, and then the branch that the caterpillar walks on. So as you can see, I've basically drawn the items at each distance on its own level, and this allows me to add a blur effect to all items that are the same distance away. So if I take a look at that by turning on the preview, so the bushes have had a small blur too, and the trees here have had a larger blur and a more distinct blur in the far background. If we take a look at that on the FX schematic, so you can see the branch hasn't got any kind of blur, the first bushes have got a small blur, followed by the trees slightly more, and then the faded trees even more so. So if we take a quick look at each of the meshes, by turning them on and going to the plastic tool, so this is for the trees in the background. And if I step through, you can see them moving a slight bit to the right and then back to the left again. And if I look at the nearby trees, again they'll move to the right and back again. And these bushes have got an internal skeleton, and if I step through that, you can see I'm showing the bush rotating a little bit and slightly resizing with the keep distance turned off to make the bush move slightly to the right and grow as it moves, and then again back to the left. And finally, the single bush on the left, I put 2 arms of skeleton on the bush. As I move, you'll see why the left arm doesn't move at all, and the right arm stretches that mesh over to the right. And this is so the bush can move to the right without leaving a gap down the left hand side, because all of the drawing is already on the screen. And if I didn't have the skeleton arm coming down the left, the bush would move away from the side of the screen and leave a small gap. So depending on the item you want to animate, for example the trees, a single skeleton swaying left and right is fine, but for the bush you want them to resize and twist and turn slightly to give a more realistic effect. And it's a very subtle animation effect, but it's really useful for the background. So for instance, you could use this for clouds moving, or smoke coming out of a chimney or a volcano. And instead of just moving them across the screen, you can deform them as they go. So the final thing to point out is that to stop these animations looking too mechanical, I spaced out the keys, as you can see here, so the animations ended at different times. And then I simply copied the key from the first frame to a different point at the end. Okay, so the whole background animation lasts 230 frames. So on the main timeline, I just repeated these frames by highlighting them, by clicking the first, moving to the end, holding shift, selecting the last, right clicking, choosing edit cell numbers, and then repeat. And here you can choose a number of times to repeat, and it'll work out the number of frames. So if I just put in to repeat twice, and then press tab to move to the next cell, it'll tell me that'll last to frame 690. Or you can tell it the number of frames to last, and it'll tell you how many times it needs to repeat. And I chose this latter. So if I put 1400 and then click away from there, it'll tell me it needs to repeat 6 times. And it repeated all the way to frame 1400, ending on frame number 20 of the sub-x sheet. And the final thing I need to do is to adjust the caterpillar slightly so it's lower on the screen so he walks along the log. Now do this on the schematic page, and on the stage schematic for the caterpillar I just need to add a peg, which I will insert in the middle, and then use the animate tool to change the position of this peg to bring it down the screen slightly. I must make sure I'm on frame 1, and then I'll bring it down to there. And if I skip through the animation, I can check that he stays on the log. So I'll just render that now. So that's how you can use the plastic tool with your character and background drawings, but you can also use it with your cutout characters, and it might not be obvious why or even how you'd use it. So that's what we'll be looking at next week. So why not subscribe so you don't miss it? Now that's a guarantee.